Welcome to BillionX. Today I will tell you a story that will touch your heart and shake your soul. A story about how losing everything can become the beginning of something extraordinary. He was living the life many dreamed of: success, luxury, love. But life doesn't always play fair. In a matter of days, he lost his business, his closest friends, and the love of his life. Betrayed, heartbroken, and standing alone, he faced a world that suddenly turned cold. People who once cheered for him now whispered behind his back, calling him a failure. With nothing left but shattered dreams and painful memories, he reached the darkest corner of his life. But sometimes rock bottom is the solid ground we need to rise again. In the silence of his downfall, he heard the loudest voice, his own. With every tear, every sleepless night, he began to rebuild not his business, but his soul. He realized strength isn't about how much you have, but how much you can lose and still stand tall. He started with small steps, reading, learning, exercising, fueling his mind and body. He cut ties with negativity and faced his fears head-on. His pain became his teacher, his failure became his fuel, and slowly he began to see a new version of himself in the mirror. The journey was lonely, but not hopeless. The world didn't notice his quiet rise. There were no applause, no cheers, only silent victories. He started a small business from his bedroom, one that no one believed in. He worked day and night, sometimes without food, sometimes without sleep. Every failure taught him lessons that success never could. He learned resilience, patience, and the power of showing up even when the world doesn't care. People laughed. People doubted. But he kept going because this time his strength came from within, not from others' validation. One day, the world that once ignored him began to notice. His business grew, not overnight, but through endless nights. The man who once lost everything was now helping others rise. He became a symbol of hope, not because he never fell, but because he fell and refused to stay down. People who once abandoned him came back, but he had changed. He no longer sought their approval. He found peace in his purpose. Real strength, he realized, is silent. It's built in the dark, revealed in the light, and forever rooted in pain that didn't break you. He now stands at the peak, not as the man who once had everything, but as the man who lost it all and came back stronger. His scars are visible, his journey unforgettable, but his heart unbreakable. And if you're watching this, if you're at your lowest, remember, it's not the end. Sometimes life is just waiting for you to discover the real version of yourself. Don't fear losing everything. Fear never starts over, because true strength is born in the fire of failure. It's in you too, waiting. There were nights when he questioned everything. Why him? Why did life crush him so brutally? But every time he wanted to quit, he remembered, diamonds are made under pressure. The pain wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Every sleepless night, every failure carved him into something unshakable. He stopped fearing failure, because he knew failure was no longer his enemy, it was his teacher. Slowly, he rewired his mind to see obstacles as opportunities. The man who once broke was now unbreakable, not because life became easier, but because he became tougher. People saw the success, but not the scars. They saw the rise, but not the falls. Every step forward was written in sweat, tears, and silent battles nobody clapped for. He learned that true warriors don't need an audience. They need purpose. And his purpose was no longer wealth or fame. It was to live fully, with meaning, with resilience. He stopped chasing things that could be lost and started building things that no one could take away: character, wisdom, and inner peace. The voices of doubt were loud, but his determination was louder. He understood now, what you feed grows. If you feed fear, fear controls you. If you feed hope, hope guides you. So he filled his mind with knowledge, his heart with gratitude, and his days with relentless action. Even on days when he failed again, he refused to give up. He wasn't the same person anymore. He was stronger, wiser, and above all, grateful for the pain that woke him up. He began sharing his story with others, not to boast, but to inspire. He told them, "I lost everything, and that's how I found myself." His words became light for those trapped in their darkness. He wasn't just a man who survived. He became a lighthouse for others. And with every soul he touched, his healing deepened. Life wasn't about falling. It was about rising so many times that falling no longer scared you. And as his new life unfolded, he smiled. Not because he had it all back, but because he finally understood the secret. Real strength comes from what you survive, not what you own. Losing everything taught him what truly matters: courage, kindness, and the unstoppable fire inside. He was no longer afraid of losing, because he now knew he could rebuild from zero again and again forever. That is real power. That is real freedom. There came a day when he looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. Not because of how much he had lost, but because of how much he had grown. The boy who once chased external success had transformed into a man grounded in inner peace. He no longer sought validation, applause, or perfection. He had learned to dance with uncertainty, to smile through pain, and to carry both failure and hope in the same heart. It was no longer about what the world thought. It was about who he chose to become every single day. Every great comeback begins with a breakdown. He realized that his darkest moments were gifts wrapped in pain. They stripped away the false layers, the pride, the ego, the illusions, and revealed the core of who he was. It wasn't the wealth that made him valuable. It was his resilience. It wasn't the applause that made him worthy. It was his courage to start over. The storms that were meant to destroy him became the winds that lifted him higher than he'd ever been. One by one, he rebuilt the pieces of his life, but this time differently. He built with gratitude, with humility, and with unshakable patience. He didn't rush. He didn't chase. He simply focused on becoming the strongest version of himself, and the right opportunities followed. The old him would have crumbled under pressure. The new him had learned the most powerful lesson of all. Your life isn't measured by what you achieve. It's measured by how you rise after you fall. People began to notice the difference, not in his possessions, but in his presence. He no longer carried the weight of fear or the burden of the past. His energy spoke louder than words. He smiled more. He helped others more. And most importantly, he forgave, not just those who hurt him, but himself. Because he realized healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing not to let it define you. The world couldn't take his soul, and that made him invincible. As the years passed, his story became proof that sometimes losing everything is the greatest blessing life can offer. It forces you to become the person you were always meant to be. He no longer feared storms because he had become the storm. His scars weren't weaknesses. They were medals of survival. And every time he stood tall, he carried not just his story, but the stories of millions who needed to believe that starting over is not the end, it's a new beginning. With every passing challenge, he became stronger, not just in action but in mindset. He no longer wasted time asking, "Why me?" Instead, he asked, "What can this teach me?" The setbacks that once broke him now shaped him. Every disappointment refined his character, and every heartbreak deepened his wisdom. He had mastered the art of resilience, the quiet strength of rising without noise, the silent power of believing without proof. And that, he realized, is where true greatness begins, inside, where no one else can see. He had discovered the secret that most people never learn. It's not the wins that shape you, it's the losses. Success without struggle is empty. But success built on shattered pieces is unshakable. Every time he rose, he carried the lessons of every fall within him. He wasn't afraid of losing again, because he knew he could rebuild stronger and wiser. He no longer feared failure. In fact, he welcomed it. Because he knew, the deeper the fall, the greater the rise. Now, when people looked at him, they saw not just success, they saw strength carved from pain. They saw eyes that had cried, but still burned with purpose. They saw hands that had failed, but never stopped building. He had become the hero of his own story. Not because life made it easy, but because he refused to stay broken. The world had taken everything from him once, but he had gained something far more valuable, unbreakable will, and that will lit the path for others to follow. And so his story teaches us all. Losing everything isn't the end. It's a doorway to discovering the strongest version of yourself. Life will break you, bend you, and test you, but the choice to rise again will always be yours. Remember, it's not about never falling. It's about refusing to stay down. And if you ever feel like giving up, come back to this story and let it remind you, your comeback is only just beginning. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to BillionX for more powerful stories that awaken the fighter within you.